Peatlands might be one of the most important ecosystems in the world, but you've probably never heard of them. Why? Well, because they look like this, and this, and this. You might be thinking, isn't that just dirt? And you would be right, but peat isn't like other dirt, it's special. Peat is a soil with a lot of organic matter in it, up to at least 30 centimeters. In most soils, organic matter decomposes pretty quickly, but peatlands are saturated with water. This means there's not enough oxygen in the soil for complete decomposition. This is what we call anoxic conditions. This might sound quite simple, but there are actually many types of peatlands. Peatlands are found all over the world, but usually in tropical or temperate conditions. Then there are several subcategories of peatland like marsh, bog, fen, swamp, salt marsh, quagmire and quivering bog. But as these all get confusing very quickly and as no one actually agrees on which one is which, we are going to keep it simple. There are peatlands and mirelands. Mirelands are peatlands that are actively producing peat, and peatlands include mirelands and everything else. So, what does actively producing peat mean? Well, some peatlands stop producing peat due to shifts in weather conditions or climate. So if an area becomes warmer, the peatland will dry out and stop producing peat. So why do we care? It's just dirt! Because peatlands have so much organic matter and are so unique among ecosystems, they provide us with a lot of useful functions, which we call ecosystem services. These include minimizing flood risks and erosion, water purification, and regulating the climate. In fact, to say they regulate the climate is an understatement. Peatlands are the largest natural carbon store on land, sequestering an estimated 0.37 gigatons of carbon dioxide every year. But how? It's just slightly wetter dirt! Well, a huge driver of climate change is carbon dioxide, as we explained in our introduction video. As humans, we release tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, often by burning fossil fuels. The carbon part of CO2 is found in every living thing. We are made mostly of carbon, and so is everything else. Let's take a cow for example. A cow lives its happy life. Over time it produces some methane and CO2, both greenhouse gases. It also eats plants and takes their carbon into their own body to grow. When it dies, it starts to decompose, and all the carbon gets released into the atmosphere as CO2, which on a large scale leads to, indeed, climate change. Now consider that the cow dies and is covered by peat in a peatland. The cow does not decompose, because peatlands are anoxic and carbon dioxide needs carbon and oxygen to form. Yes, indeed, that is what the O in CO2 stands for. Wow! Instead, the cow is stored as organic material under the ground, never being released into the atmosphere. This is an extreme example, as usually the actual organic matter comes from plants and small animals, like worms. But peatlands have formed over millions and millions of years. That's millions and millions of years of organic matter being stored underground and prevented from entering the atmosphere and causing climate change. In fact, about 30% of the world's soil carbon is stored in peatlands. So this is great! There's a lot of carbon that could hurt the atmosphere that's stuck underground. We can all go home because peatlands are awesome! Well, remember when I talked about mirelands being peatlands that are actively creating peat? Well, when peatlands stop producing peat, there's a problem. These peatlands are dead. They're drying up and all the carbon that has been carefully packaged and stored in the ground starts to be released. That's millions of years of stored carbon being released into the atmosphere. But don't worry, it's not like anyone is deliberately harming the peat. Wait, no! What are you doing? No! So the interesting thing about carbon-rich soil is that it's an excellent fuel. Historically, peat was harvested to use as a fuel to heat homes. This has mostly been stopped due to emerging regulations, now that we know more about peat. But it still gets harvested for water extraction, certain whiskies, spa treatments, fertilizer, and raw agricultural material. That's right. Peat is also incredibly fertile. You will often find that peat is a component of many standard fertilizers, but using peat for gardening would be like using ancient precious documents to wrap a birthday present. But very few people know or care, because, as you might remember, it looks like this. So why is growing agriculture on top of land so bad? Well, in order to use peatlands for agriculture, you need to dry them up. As I've mentioned, this can lead to greenhouse gases, namely CO2, being released into the atmosphere. But really, that's not the only problem. Peat is very flammable. That's why it makes such a good fuel. Peatlands are often drained and converted to agriculture for palm oil, which is a common crash crop. Palm oil plantations can only exist in a warm climate. This combined with the dry, flammable peat often leads to, yes, you guessed it correctly, fires. And when peat burns, it smolders. Peat fires can burn beneath the surface. This leads to incomplete combustion, which leads to extreme greenhouse gas emissions and toxic fumes. Not to mention that the fire can spread to other ecosystems and become a full-blown wildfire. At least we get palm oil, right? No! Peat in agriculture decreases in quality rapidly. So, what do farmers do then? Yes. They drain another peatland and start growing there. By 2006, approximately 46% of peatlands had been deforested, with 500,000 hectares continuing to be destroyed annually. The peatlands that are still there are under pressure from rising global temperatures and are drying out anyway. That's why there are a ton of organizations out there trying to restore peatlands. This is called Rewetting, which is literally adding more water to peatlands to maintain those anoxic conditions. Unfortunately, this takes time. Peat grows at a rate of approximately 1 millimeter per year, which is why so many people are trying to preserve the ones we have and lobby for stricter regulations surrounding peatlands. But it doesn't fix the ones that have already been drained. So, what can you do? Well, you can check products for peat-like fertilizers. You can also check for palm oil, which is often found in chocolate. There are also several peatland charities and non-profits across the world working on peatland restoration and preservation. But those often depend on your country. The most important thing you can do is help spread awareness about peatlands. They are not just dirt. Well, they are, but they're special dirt, okay? Next time there's a lapse in the dinner conversation, take the opportunity to inform people about peatlands. There's nothing people love more than talking about dirt after all. Peatlands are delicate ecosystems. Healthy peatlands sequester huge amounts of carbon. But tip them too far and they become net carbon emitters, advancing climate change. There are people all over the world helping to protect and restore peatlands, and through videos like this, more people are learning about them every single day. Thanks for watching and leave a comment to tell us what flavor of dirt is your favorite.